Well, good afternoon to everyone. I'm here just to present my research titled Growing Pains, a novel metric to orient ethical startup growth in the 21st century. The research was conducted under supervision of Professor Tom Anastasi from Questrom. And it began because while startups have grown in number, market cap, and popularity at an unprecedented rate since the 2008 economic recession, there have been several instances in which some of these companies have been caught betraying their initial intent or acting unethically. Silicon Valley, one of the, if not the largest hub of startups in the world, has seen various scandals in the last few years, from Uber's chaotic 2017, mired with just abuse allegations, to Terrano's data falsification scandal, Zenefits employee scam, and many others, unfortunately. This has been known as the ugly underside of Silicon Valley. And of course, this is not new. Companies have been unethical way before Silicon Valley was a thing. However, the number of scandals is troublesome, and there seems to be a strong correlation between having a dysfunctional company culture and acting unethically. In fact, a recent study suggests that 85% of all of the CEOs interviewed believe this link exists. So taking that into account, what exactly is company culture? And for this project, it was defined as a byproduct of consistent behavior, and it was considered a manageable and fluid trait, which means it can change. Honestly, the company cultures has been studied now for decades, and the science is pretty settled. I mean, a positive company culture has been shown to have higher indexes of job satisfaction, happier employees, companies sort of focusing on the long term and therefore acting ethically. Not surprisingly, a dysfunctional company culture brings all the equal counterparts, thinking about the short term, unhappy employees, all of those things which are far from ideal. And the other keystone concept of the study is the idea of the startup soul. This is a much newer concept and was first coined by Professor Gulati at Harvard Business School. It has three major components, which you can see there. The first one being business intent, which is essentially like, why is the company here? What is it exactly that they're trying to do? Then employee success, which is just, do employees feel energized and motivated by their work? And lastly, customer centeredness, which is, do they know who their customers are, and do they put them at the center of what they're doing? These three components, according to Professor Gulati, are the roots of the company in a way, hence the little saplings. And these two concepts, the startup soul and company culture, were the basis for the growing pains metric, which is the metric I developed. And that leads me to the methodology. Two startups were selected out of a potential pool of six. All of them had to be at least 18 months old at the time of the interview. And the two startups I selected were Orbit and Sinovatech. Orbit is set out to create a new social app to nurture one's closest relationships mindfully. And then Sinovatech is trying to democratize shelf-stable technologies for food companies and also reducing global food waste. Um, so the experiment was conducted on these two companies, and a breakdown of the metric itself leads to, you can see that the startup soul side of things, it was analyzed and studied mainly via interviews. There was one interview with the company founder or CEO, and another interview with at least one employee. And for the company culture side of the equation, an edited MIT Sloan model studying 7 key values like integrity, collaboration, etc., was used, and answers were compiled via surveys that were responded by the same individuals and also myself. So some sample sort of statements on the survey are there, which is just communicating and working with other departments of the company is easy. Do you agree, disagree with that statement? It had 21 of those statements. And then on the interviews, you can see like some of the questions, which is, well, why is Orbit or Sinovatech here? What has been the biggest setback the company has had, and how is that handled? And who are Orbit and Sinovatech's customers? You can see that on the interview questions, I'm trying to get at the soul side of things, while the survey is more focused on the sort of company culture. And what were the findings, right? In fact, both companies rated pretty well. Orbit got a 17.5 and Sinovatec a 17.9. There you can see the subcomponents. And once the company culture score was correctly weighted, you get the composite score, which is essentially just an addition of the two numbers. Due to time constraints, I won't get into each specific area of opportunity for the companies right now, but in general, Orbit's weakest link was their customer centeredness area. They don't have a ton of ways for customers to contact them or to voice their opinions. And then in Sinovatec's case, the issues lay more in that they are seeing some external pressures mount up, mainly with their venture funds, like their investors. Um, so all of this was discussed with the company CEOs, and they felt it was representative of their company, which is great for the metric. However, there are some clear limitations as a new model, and I'll get into some of them. First of all, there were some conceptual challenges. The concept of the soul is a bit esoteric and quite new. So there were some change, even with some of the changes that I included, for example, like looking at past company actions and analyzing them. The idea is still not 100% or defined or perfectly clear. Given the another potential sort of limitation is that given that this is the first time the metric was used, there was no control group or no like previous database. So it is hard to know if Orbit and Sinovatec are actually really positive companies or if the metric is just too generous. For that, we would need more companies to be studied. Another limitation is that it takes quite a bit of commitment. There's at least, at least 2 to 3 hours of one-on-one interviews with each company and then filling out the corresponding surveys. So it is not like using this model, companies can be mass analyzed at the moment. It is a more tedious process. And finally, in the MIT Sloan model that was used for evaluating company culture, there are 7 values, and all of them were weighted equally. But that may not always be the best idea, as in some particular cases that maybe execution is more important for a particular company, or maybe diversity for another one, or vice versa. It might be a good idea to play with the weightings of each. And finally, just with this metric, companies will be able to assess sort of their current company culture, will be able to reflect on how their actions so far are aligned with their mission and what their areas for growth are. Said before, a healthy culture is tied to better work and happier sort of employees and a more ethical company as a whole. Similarly, a strong soul will provide guidance when tough decisions emerge. So while this metric is not too generalizable as it requires in-depth study of every company of interest, the idea is that it will serve as a guidepost of sorts to both early and late stage companies when assessing where they stand. And with this information, the hope is that companies will be more purpose-driven and be a congruent, ethical example amidst the all too common ugly underside of Silicon Valley and the business world. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any of your questions.